Hello, this is Bob at Reality Training, and welcome to another short video which I'm going to very quickly list my current top 10 books that I've read. And the criteria that I've used to choose these books are books that I generally go back to again and again. And there's a number of those, and I've got them listed here. There's a few notable exceptions on this list. I wanted to include something by Sebastian Faulks. I love his writing. I love writing by Henry Miller and other great writers such as that. But in this instance, I'm going back to fiction that I've reread many times as my kind of judgment point of whether or not I think they're good. So I'm going to list them as 10 novels, but ultimately they're all fantastic as far as I'm concerned. I've also very surprised to realise that of all these books that I'm going to list, I've actually met 6 of the authors. I'll mention that as I go, but there we are. So number 10, I have got Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies. It's 2 books, but hey, what the hell, by Hilary Mantel. These are beautifully written books. They are just fantastic. I can't wait for the 3rd, which is coming out soon, but I would highly recommend those if you haven't read them. Number 9, I've got a play. It's a play called The Hot House by Harold Pinter. I met Harold Pinter a couple of times when I was younger, which was a very lucky thing to have done. He was a very charming gentleman. And The Hot House is a fantastic play all about the institution where people are kept in a kind of society which is quite dystopian, and it has some brilliant characters in, and if you've never read it, I'd highly recommend it. The Hot House is brilliant. Number 8 is another play, and it is Glengarry Glen Ross. Glengarry Glen Ross is a superb play about salesmen. There's no women in it at all, although it would be brilliant to do it with an all-female cast. Written by David Mamet, who I also met earlier on this year. And I'd highly recommend that. It's quite offensive, though, so be careful if you're offended by bad language. Number 7 is Goodbye Soldier by Spike Milligan. He wrote a number of books all about his time in the army during the Second World War, and Goodbye Soldier is a romance, a wonderful romance about his relationship with an Italian ballerina. I'd highly recommend that. It's very funny, and I also met him a few years ago, and he signed a copy of that book for me. The next one is Churchill, Walking with Destiny by Andrew Roberts, another author that I met. It is a cracking read. I haven't finished it yet. It's a massive book, but it is brilliant. It is all about Churchill's amazing life. I'd highly recommend it. He really led the most incredible life you could ever imagine, and then went on to lead us during the Second World War. So I'd recommend that book. It's a brilliant read. Now, number 5 is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. So this is a really upbeat book about following your dreams. It's a brilliant book. It's been mentioned by so many famous people who've cited it as a kind of inspiration to them. It's beautifully written about a boy's search for treasure, or what is his treasure, and I'd recommend you read that. Number 4 is Flashman at the Charge by George MacDonald Fraser. There's a series of Flashman books, a Victorian adventurer who led his fictional career after Tom Brown's school days. That's where he was originally coined, Flashman the Bully, and there's a series of books about him. Flashman at the Charge of the Light Brigade is a brilliant book. It's exciting. It'll be an amazing film. I'd highly recommend that too. Now, the top 3, take your pick, whichever's number 1. They're all brilliant. So the first one is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. I met him a few weeks ago. He's a lovely chap, and this book is amazing, about a man confined to a hotel in Moscow, and what goes on there, and the way that this man presents himself is an inspiration. So I recommend that. Then we've got The Magus by John Fowles. The Magus is incredible. It was made into a dreadful film with Michael Caine many years ago. I definitely wouldn't bother to watch that. But the book by John Fowles is superb. Really interesting psychological thriller. Absolutely brilliant. And then lastly, Any Human Heart by William Boyd, who I met last year. Any Human Heart, I've read it time and time again. A man who lived his life through the entire century, starting in the 1900s and going through to the 1990s. And he's a writer, and he has some interesting adventures along the way, and you can't help but liking him. It's a really wonderful saga. So those are my 10 books. I hope that you go out and buy them and read them, and we'll have more lists of my preferences in due course. This is Bob Morell at Reality Training. Thanks for listening.